Good morning and blessings to everybody as we gather for our Bible study today. Uh, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, as we gather this morning, we pray that you would be with us and enlighten us as we spend time in your word. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so last week we left off with the Philistines having captured the ark and the death of Phineas and Hophni. Yeah. And which is a fulfillment of the prophecy of that unknown prophet that came along, and also what first Samuel, what Samuel tells Eli as after the Lord speaks to him and calls to him in the temple. Anyhow, so we left off with that defeat. Well, the story it continues, and we're going to pick up there now in verse 12. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day, with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man hurried and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, "I am he who came from the battle. I fled from the battle today." And he said, "How did it go, my son?" He who brought the news answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." As he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat. Whoa. Sorry, my computer just decided, let's not just scroll a little bit, let's scroll all the way through the Bible. Give me a second here as I get back to where I need to be. There we go. As soon as he had mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or pay attention. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." All right, so today we begin with the runner coming to tell everybody that the defeat has happened, that this horrible thing is going on. One of the things that I personally have found interesting is the fact that he is described as fleeing from the battle lines. And so my first thought when I hear this is a guy who panicked and ran. He abandoned his fellows on the battlefield and just ran away. So what we would call a deserter. So I have to admit, I'm not favorably inclined towards this person who just ran like this. But this guy, he shows up in Shiloh, and he tells the folks what's going on. And when Eli hears of this, the writer of Samuel records that Eli fell over backwards and broke his neck. And I admit that's one of those things that's probably going to sound strange because we normally don't think of if somebody's sitting down and they fall down, they can break their neck. But that is one of those kind of things that can just happen. Um, and even in what we would consider normalish circumstances. Years ago, when I was a vicar, we had a fellow pastor in our area who was, it was after Sunday services. He was just walking down the hall in his church, and he trips just over absolutely nothing. And in the process, he falls, and in falling, he broke his neck. And it was a very significant break. It was up around the like the second vertebrae in the neck, and you know those kind of falls tend to be pretty fatal. But he survived. And in fact, the last I had heard, he had made a pretty full recovery too, which is a miracle of miracles by itself. But I just bring this up simply because when we hear this event, and it just sounds so outrageous, but it can happen. I mean, all it takes is falling wrong. And that's exactly what happened to this pastor. He fell wrong. And and he ended up spending months, probably close to a year, in a hospital and rehab, regaining his abilities. So here we are. We are witnessing the judgment against Eli and his family, is what this is all going to boil down to. The judgment's happening. Now, the reaction of Phinehas's wife is interesting. Not so much in that she goes into labor. Right? That's just something that happens with pregnant ladies. I mean, eventually they're going to go into labor at some point. But how she decides to name her son. She names him Ichabod. Ichabod, by the way, literally means inglorious. I know it's easy for us to take. She names him Ichabod because the glory has departed from Israel. And to think, oh, it must mean the glory has departed. Well, not really. It means inglorious. It means there's no glory. Glory is lacking. Is basically what this word means. Though it does make you wonder why somebody would decide to name their kid Ichabod Crane. Granted, and if the Disney version of Sleepy Hollow was anywhere accurate, I'm guessing he wasn't exactly the most glorious of figures. So maybe that was appropriate. But what it does do here, though, is it gives kind of a confession on how she thinks about things. She claims that the glory of God has left Israel because the ark has been captured. So it shows kind of the weight that she places upon the ark itself. That the ark being captured is a sign that God has left Israel and things of that nature. And to be fair, there is that understanding that God himself has given that where his name is where he shall be dwelling, and he had made, and where he has promised to dwell, there he will be. And he had made a promise that he would be there at the seat of mercy, which is the top of the ark where the angel's wings are, and that's where he would be to for his people to give mercy. So it's not that the ark has zero significance, but it becomes here a question of where they're placing too much significance upon the presence of the ark. Because one of the reasons I must say this is because at this point there has been no statement from God that says, I am leaving Israel, which is actually something he did do later on. As you read through some of the latter prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel in particular, where they're dealing with the coming Babylonian invasion, one of the things God does say is, I'm going to leave. My temple will no longer be my temple anymore. I'm leaving the temple. Its value is over. It's done. You've desecrated it so much. I'm not sticking around. So there is a time and a place where he is actually going to do that, but it's not here in Samuel. So for her to completely say that the glory of Israel has left is incorrect. Has Israel suffered a defeat? Yes. Is Israel facing judgment? Yes. Has God left his people? No. So he's still there. He's still among his people. He's still working with his people. But he's letting them know he's serious. In a sense, you could equate this with something that could occur in the modern church. When pastors and churches wish to communicate that what is happening is serious, particularly in regards to sin, churches will exercise what is called the minor ban. And what the minor ban is it's just a simple statement that says, look, what you're doing is wrong, and we want to get this across to you that it's wrong, so we're going to ask you for a time to not come to communion. We're not going to give you communion. Yeah, it was pointed out that in medieval times, the Pope would place entire countries under the ban. Of all the sacraments. Man, that'd be rough. No baptisms, no marriage. Remember, marriage is one of the sacraments in the Roman Catholic Church, and no unction. Unction is what most people refer to as the last rites. And that's serious stuff. But in today, at least in the Lutheran Church, one of the things that can happen is the pastor will say, look, I got to impress upon you that this is serious business, and say, like, you're just not going to be given communion for a period of time. This, though it sounds similar to excommunication, isn't full of excommunicated because the person's not removed from membership. The person but it does share the no communion aspect. And it's basically just to get across, this is serious and we're not going to mess around. We could consider the ark being taken away, something along those lines. God is saying, this is serious. I'm not messing around. It's time to wake up, Israel. And it's not an easy lesson. It's actually a very hard lesson. Because the loss of the ark is a major hit to the assurance of the people. Because if they lose the ark, it means that the sacrifice of atonement cannot happen. And the part of the sacrifice of the atonement is that the priest was to stand before the ark and offer the shed blood of the sacrifices at the mercy seat. And then he was to go out and proclaim the forgiveness of God to the people. Well, if that doesn't happen, if the ark isn't there, that can't happen. So that is a major loss to the people that has happened here. And so we can understand that this is going to be a hefty thing for them to deal with. They don't have the ark, so the sacrifice of the atonement can't happen. And if the atonement can't happen, can they know that they're God's people? Which brings me to my discussion question here. What kind of things today would be such a loss? And we did kind of touch on the one with the idea of the minor ban. To not be able to receive communion would be something of a significant loss for people. And that is one of the chief places where we can go and know that we are forgiven. That there is the assurance of life and salvation. But what other things today, if we lost them, would be that kind of a loss? The ability to gather for worship. I know some of our brothers or sisters have been kind of experiencing that right now with the whole pandemic thing. And then there hasn't been a day that's gone by that I have not thanked God, Governor Abbott as our governor, because we haven't had to face some of the questions that our brothers and sisters have had to face in some of our other states here during this whole COVID-19 thing. And I know of pastors who haven't had anybody in their church for like the past 5 months because they haven't been allowed to have anybody in their churches. And some of it, it's not because they're not allowed nobody, but they're allowed so few people that by the time they have everybody who's, actively serving in the worship service there, they can have like 5, maybe 3 people in attendance. So it becomes kind of impracticality. And so a lot of those guys have been doing virtual services, and honestly, virtual services aren't the same. I can attest. I mean, sitting here talking to a camera just is not the same as having a room full of people. It's just different. Even though I'm not in the middle of the divine service having a complete conversation with people, it's still different. And just a completely different vibe, and you just feel things missing. And in some places, they're not really well set up for virtual services either. That was actually kind of one of those real eye-openers for myself that we were dealing with early on, as not every place has the internet capability to be able to do the virtual service. It took us, a month to figure out that we needed to upgrade our internet service. In the meantime, we're trying to figure out why we can't keep a live stream established. And I couldn't imagine being one of those places where they don't even have a landline to be using for this. But yeah, and even amongst those who were struggling, we were kind of blessed because we already had the equipment here to do a lot of the live streaming. But yeah, and so it's just kind of one of those things. And yeah, the loss of being able to gather, that would be a big one. What are some other things that could be lost? Forbidden to use the Bible, yeah. That would be a big one too. And I know that's one of those things that our missionaries really try to work around, is being in the areas where they're not allowed to import Bibles. There was a discussion the other day with our LWML group where they're going, wait, they can't send Bibles with the blankets and such that they're sending, and the answer is, well, no, we kind of gotta do an end round on them. Yeah, that was actually a problem for our troops. The comment was made that even Saudi Arabia has pretty strict laws about bringing in Bibles, and we had to really push to get them to allow our soldiers to bring their personal Bibles with them. Yeah, not having the scripture in your own language, that also makes things a challenge. Lutheran Bible translators and some of the other groups, they're doing some fantastic work. And I can't imagine the challenges. years ago, I met one of our translators, and they were working on translating the Bible into African click language. You want to challenge there? There isn't even an alphabet. They're making up an alphabet to create a literary language for the people to read the Bible in their own language. So yeah, that's a challenge. There's a book series that came out as a kind of a young adult fiction series, and it's based in a dystopian future. Don't ask me why young adult literature of lately is fascinated with dystopians, but they are. I know. But anyhow, in this particular dystopian future, it is a version of America where something has happened. I'm not really certain. I haven't actually finished the series now that I think about it. But they're under this totalitarian government that is trying to control everything, and one of the things they did is destroy all the Bibles. Yeah, the comment was, and the reason it could happen is it happened gradually over time, and part of the reason that was able to happen is because the Bible wasn't really a part of even the Christian's daily life. One of the things I found fascinating about this series is there's a whole group of people who are taking the Bible passage that they had memorized and were trying to reconstruct the entirety of the Scriptures. And so they had this whole underground network of people together who were trying to get all the various remembered Bible passages put back together. Yeah. And then they would also dig up old scraps. It was kind of like what happens in modern day biblical archaeology, where they're out digging and they're looking for old manuscripts, and then trying to put them all together so that we know it's in the Scriptures. But yeah, to lose the Bible would be a big blow. All right, let's move on here. Oop, I got to hit the right one here. We're going to look at chapter 5 now. The entirety of chapter 5. When the Philistines captured the Ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the Ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen downward on the ground before the Ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter in the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, "The ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God." So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" They answered, "Let the ark of God of Israel be brought round to Gath." So they brought the ark of God of Israel there. But after they brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city, causing a very great panic. And he afflicted the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But as soon as the ark of God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, "They have brought around to us the ark of God of Israel to kill us and our people." They sent therefore and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people." For there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was very heavy there. The men who did not die were struck with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. And there we get to witness a case of not in my backyard. They wanted to have the Ark of God captured because that was a symbol of their victory over Israel, but nobody wanted the Ark in their own backyard. And honestly, I don't blame them. So after capturing the Ark of God, the Philistines took it to one of their temples in one of their chief cities. Ashdod is this particular city. And they put it into one of their temples. It was to be there as a symbol of being subject to their God. Of course, the God here is Dagon, which brings us to a good question for us to answer. Who's Dagon? It sounds like a demon. You're probably not wrong. In fact, that's actually one of my that's my personal understanding of the false gods. Is the false gods are demons, and they are among those who fell with Lucifer. And well, they've tried to set themselves up as gods because they thought they could God better than God. Anyhow, so Dagon. Well, Dagon's kind of the national god of the Philistines, or at least that's how Samuel and some of the other Old Testament writers are going to portray Dagon. We're not really 100% certain as to exactly who or what he was supposed to be. There was two major theories as to who he was. He was kind of that he's either the fertility god of the harvest or he is the god of the sea. There's some question about that. So there are some depictions of what they think might be Dagon in some of the art, which just displays kind of a half man, half fish looking thing. Top half is man, bottom half is fish. So kind of like the idea of merman. And but there's his name is in Ugaritic, which is similar to Hebrew, references fields or wheat or something along those lines, and so some have posited that maybe he was the god of the harvest and was associated with fertility. Yeah. And that actually, it was commented that the Philistines were kind of a seagoing people, and that most of their stuff was kind of near the coast. Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why folks have thought that he's like the god of the sea, because he would be a major concern for them as a seagoing people. I mean, if you're an ocean-going people, you're going to want to make sure that if you believe in a God that rules over it, you're going to want to make sure that God is happy with you because, well, the sea is a treacherous place and you don't want to die at the sea. So...
I think the simple thing to do would be to destroy it, but they must have feared that the God of Israel, so much that they didn't, that they would continue to keep it there and move it about rather than destroy it.
Yeah, it does bring up the question that why didn't they just destroy the ark? Yeah, the comment was made, well, after seeing that their God was uh, subjecting himself to the God of Israel, they are thinking, maybe if we desecrate the ark, he'll be really mad. Um, and I would highly suspect that's probably the reason they're not going to destroy it. They just want to, not my backyard. Uh, and that is exactly what happens. And Dagon, they put him in that temple, and they find Dagon prostrate before the ark, which is very much a demonstration of being subject to. So they have Dagon being showing as lower than the God of Israel, or to use the name Yahweh. That Dagon is subject to Yahweh, which is makes sense. Like Yahweh is God of gods. That's one of the titles that is revealed to us in the scriptures. And eventually, they come back and they find not only has Dagon been, bowing before the ark, he is destroyed. The loss of his head and his arms. And that head and arms comment is also one of the reasons why folks tend to think that maybe he was the god of the sea, with those depictions of, a torso and then fishtail. Well, the head and the arms would be the limbs to go. So he's completely humiliated in front of Yahweh, and demonstrating that he's lesser than Yahweh, which is going to be kind of a blow to the Philistines, because their national god is now bowing to the god of slaves. Yeah, the god of the people they just beat. And just salt in the wounds. Not only does that happen, but tumors start erupting in the people. So exactly the nature of the tumors, we're not really certain. We just know that tumors start erupting on the people, and they put two and two together and go, it has to do with the ark, and the god of the ark is very mad at us. So all these events that are happening here in chapter 5, what do these events remind us of? The plagues, yeah, the plagues of Egypt. And this, I would say, gives credence to the idea that the plagues were aimed at the gods of Egypt, because we have a direct assault against the god of the Philistines, and an attack against his people, in such a way that it would, render them powerless. So yeah, we have a hearkening back to the Exodus. All right. Let's go on to chapter 6 here. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us with what we shall send it to its place." They said, "If you send away the ark of God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you." And they said, "What is the guilt offering we should return to him?" And they answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand off of you and your gods and your land. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had dealt severely with them, did they not send the people away, and they departed? Now then, take and prepare a new cart and 2 milk cows on which there has never come a yoke. Yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. And take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart and put it in a box at its side, the figures of gold, which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go on its way and watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by coincidence. So the men did so, and took 2 milk cows, and yoked them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. And they put the ark of the Lord on the cart in the box with the golden mice and the images of their tumors. And the cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And when they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there, and they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices on that day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. These are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord. 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, 1 for Gath, 1 for Ekron, and the golden mice according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they set down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. And after he struck some of the men of Beth Shemesh, because they had looked upon the ark of the Lord, he struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. Then the men of Beth Shemesh said, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall we go up away from us?" So they sent messengers to other inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you." Okay. So the Philistines, they decide, well, they got to talk to somebody about what do we do with this ark. So they talk to priests and diviners. And yeah, this is an interesting conversation. Because as you read it, because on one hand you got the priests and the diviners going, well, we don't have any clue. And so they suggest something that is actually quite in line with would be some of the pagan rituals for appeasing an angry god. You know, give them gold. And so that they react as they would with one of their pagan gods. And at the same time, you get this conversation where you do this. It's kind of like the priests and these diviners don't want to have anything to do with these Philistine lords. Which gives us some questions, right? Okay, so who are these guys? The one commentary that I was looking at for this passage really goes with these were not the Philistines' priests and diviners. It doesn't really offer any option as to who they could actually be, but I was wondering if these priests and diviners weren't the clerics of towns that had not been afflicted. And so they're kind of like, yeah, we don't want anything to do with you, but since you came and talked to us, we're going to give you something to do so you won't come and send that thing to us. Yeah. Yeah, the comment was made, well, they're priests of Dagon, so they're probably like, we're priests of Dagon. We know how to work with Dagon, but we don't know how to work with this weird god of Israel's, of the Israelites. And so, you just kind of keep them over there and maybe send them away. And they do operate in that sense, in that they send him the ark back with basically would be a pagan sacrifice. And they even tried to set things up so that they could prove that it was coincidence too. You notice they took two milk cows who never had a yoke, and they had calves, and they took the calves back home. Which direction do you think a cow is going to be heading? You think a cow is going to head away from her calf, or she's going to head towards her calf? And so they tried to set it up as a test, and of course the cows head to Beth Shemesh without even wavering. I mean, have you ever seen a cow go in a straight line? I mean, to never just go to the left or the right. And at least every time I've watched cows, they seem to be more interested in going to the next piece of really yummy looking grass or plant life. And they're not really exactly, going to go in a set direction, or at least, no straight direction. Yeah, and especially without a driver. There's a reason why when they were doing those big cattle drives back in the Old West, they had the outriders, the guys riding along the side. They're supposed to, send those cows back that were wandering off to go after the choice bits that just weren't quite on the path. So yeah, that's not something you're going to see every day. And so they'd set up kind of a test to see, okay, is it really this God who's afflicting us? And they end up sending the cows back. They follow the cows to make sure where they're going, and they get back to Beth Shemesh, and the people there, they start to take care of it. And apparently they didn't take care of it rightly, because it's almost a one offhand statement, and God killed 70 of them. The commentator that I was reading suggests that the Levites of Beth Shemesh carried on Phinehas's and Hophni's sin of a casual disregard of the God of Israel. And it showed in their casual handling of the ark. Because it does make the comment that they were struck down for having looked upon the ark. God is very adamant about maintaining the holiness of the stuff that goes into the Holy of Holies. And he doesn't mess around. But we're also going to be out of time here. So unless there's any questions, we're going to just go ahead and wrap up, and we'll pick up here next week. Let's close with a word of prayer. Blessed Lord, we give thanks to you for this time, and we ask that you continue to be with us as we gather around your gifts in the divine service, and we ask that you would cause us to not take those gifts for granted. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.